Good afternoon, everyone. I'm June Rawl. I'm so happy that all of you are with us today as we discuss the individualized instructional student plans for reading. We touched upon this a little bit on our last webinar, but today we're going to give you a full-blown presentation on all of the elements and how it can really help you to really begin to shift your data in the right direction. So I'm going to introduce Maria Gutierrez, who's going to be our facilitator today from Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And we're all familiar with Maria, and we appreciate Maria's expertise on this. So we're happy that you're with us. Just want to let you know that you are all in listen-only mode, and you can definitely put your questions in that Q&A section of your screen. Ask questions throughout, we'll address them. You know, anything you want to say, you just tell us you want to, whatever you want to tell us about, put it in the Q&A. So without really further ado, Maria, I think we're going to go ahead and jump right into these objectives and take some questions throughout. Maria?
Awesome. Thank you, June. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Webinar Wednesday. Today, I'm really excited about sharing our new Individualized Instructional Student Plans, or IISPs as June likes to call them, for the TABE 11-12 reading test. So let's just take a brief moment to look over the training objectives for this webinar session. In this particular session, we will unveil this IISP, which is an intervention tool that has been designed to improve your students' TABE 11-12 reading post-test scores. This long-awaited tool, the IISP for reading, will help you customize the instruction to the needs of the student, as well as provide the student with a tool to help him or her monitor progress based on mastery of content and skills. Now, a separate IISP has been developed for each of the TABE 11-12 reading level tests. This training is broken down into 3 simple parts. First, we will take a brief look at differentiating, individualizing, and personalizing instruction. And it's important that we understand the differences in these types of instruction so that we can, at least towards the end of this training, explore how we can personalize these IISPs to become more learner-centered. Second, we will take an in-depth look at the new TABE 11-12 Reading IISP to see how it was created and what content is included in each level. I'm going to walk you through the process of selecting the appropriate plan and then transferring the student's pre-test data to the plan in order to make it more individualized for each individual student. Third, I will leave you with some concluding words and a brief reflection, which hopefully will lead you to a call to action. So let's begin with step number 1. As we get started, I just want to remind you that at IPDAY, we always develop learning tools and resources based on research and best practices. It's what we do. And the development of the TABE 11-12 reading IISPs is absolutely no exception. So we're going to begin by taking a peek into the basics of how you can use these IISPs to differentiate, individualize, and personalize your instruction. Now that we've addressed the objectives for this PD, let's begin by addressing the direction that we want to take as we incorporate these new plans into our ABE curriculum. If you joined us back in June for the live training on the IISPs for language, you know that I began the training by addressing 3 education buzzwords. And I did this because I wanted you to see how you could use the IISPs to address multiple types of instruction, you know, regardless of your preference or which side of the research you choose to support. Today, I will briefly review these again for those of you who have not been able to yet view the webinar on the language IISPs. And by the way, the full recording of the live training that we did for the language IISPs is currently available on the IPDAY website, along with the fillable PDF versions of all 4 language plans. So The bottom line is that learning is a great motivator if your students can actually see that they've mastered a standard or competency and acquired a new skill that they can use. All three of these instruction types lend themselves to reaching this goal, and the new IISPs can be used to target non-mastered reading content so that minimal time is wasted and students can build on this sense of achievement. Now, we begin with differentiated instruction. Now, differentiated instruction lends itself to small group settings. Usually, the teacher will identify non-mastered content and skills and group students based on common deficiencies. The lessons are designed around the needs of each group, so it's important to select or to develop activities that specifically address non-mastered content within the group. Now, these groups are not static. This means that students are not always assigned to the same group. So we basically are going to label this type of instruction as the how. Now, as we move to individualized instruction, we begin to focus on the learning needs of each individual student. The academic goals pretty much remain the same for the course. However, individual students may progress through the curriculum at different speeds based on their learning needs. The teacher will target one need at a time and skip over content that the student has already mastered. Instruction is calibrated to meet the pace of the student. So you will see when we begin to explore these new reading IISPs, how each plan is created to emphasize what is tested at each TABE level, E, M, D, or A, whichever one. And you'll also see how the IISP allows you to incorporate individual student performance data from the student's TABE individual profile report. So this way you can specifically target standards and skills which that student has not yet mastered. As you review the IISP with the student, he's going to learn to focus on what has not been mastered and skip mastered content. Now we are going to label this type of instruction as the when. Finally, let me briefly address personalized learning. This term actually dates back to like the early 1960s or so. However, there really isn't any widespread agreement on a definition for the term. It has, however, become more popular since the RAND Corporation, in partnership with, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, began researching personalized learning and its impact on education. Now, what I want to bring across in this training, nonetheless, is that the IISPs can be used to personalize instruction for individual students should you choose to do so. The easiest way to initiate this would be for you, the teacher, to select the learning activities based on your students' interests. Now, this type of instruction combines both the how and the when and adds student participation in the selection and the creation of learning activities. Now, throughout this presentation, I want to emphasize and urge you to keep foremost in your mind that one of the key goals for using an IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner who monitors progress and reflects on learning based on mastery of content and skills. Okay, so basically what we want to do is we want to move from a teacher-centric instructional environment where there's little student choice and voice to a more student-centric one where there's more student choice and voice. And don't worry, you will soon see how this is encouraged as a standard application on the IISP. In simple terms, we know what educators want is simply to identify and successfully implement gap closing tools that lead to results. So the tool that we are addressing here is the new Individualized Instructional Student Plan for the TABE 11-12 reading students. And we're finally at that point in the training where we're ready to unveil the tool that is going to close the performance gap in your ABE reading classrooms. Now, just keep in mind that as we unveil the tool, I'm going to address 4 basic steps. These 4 basic steps that will lead to the successful implementation of these plans in your ABE reading class include step 1. First, as with any test, it is crucial to know the structure of the test as well as what is tested. These new reading IISPs were created to address both these topics. As we look at the plan and how it is structured, I will walk you through its different components and explain how they address each section of the test. So at this time, I also want to emphasize that because every IISP is unique to the subject and test level, you will observe as we continue the training that it is different from the language training in that it specifically addresses the reading test, how it's structured, and the content that is covered at each of the TABE 11-12 reading test levels. Now, this being said, we know that, and this leads us to number 2, each subject area has 4 different test levels. So, for example, like the language subject area test, the reading one has 4 test levels, E, M, D, and A. It would not have sufficed to have a generic plan to address all test levels, so we created a specific IISP for each test level, totaling 4 IISPs for reading. Now, remember to sum up the total picture, all right? This means that there are 4 IISPs for language, 4 for reading, and 4 for math. Again, in this training, we're just focusing on the reading, but the question I'm going to pose to you is, how do you know which of the 4 reading plans to use? How do you know which test level each of your students is going to post-test at? We're going to address this in depth in this step 2. Third, an IISP doesn't really become individualized until it's tailored to fit a student's learning needs. This being said, we must learn to transfer student test data onto the IISP in order to individualize it. In step 3, we're going to look at transferring student data from the TABE student's individual profile report to the IISP in order to identify non-mastered reading content for targeted instruction. And 4th step, finally, we began this training with 3 action words: differentiate, individualize, and personalize. And in step 4, I'm going to show you how you can use the data on the IISPs to address these 3 types of instruction. All right, so let's keep moving. All right, let's begin with step 1, understanding the IISP and its component. Okay, if you want your students to do well on the TABE 11-12 reading test, you know that it's not enough to just provide good instruction. I already mentioned that you and your students have to know the test inside out. You need to know what topic areas are tested, how many questions under each area, what question types are included. You need to be able to connect classroom lessons and activities directly to tested content. These new reading IISPs map out each level of the reading test. So they help you and your students focus on reading content that has not been mastered and allow you to track progress over time to identify if and when a student has mastered a sufficient amount of tested content in order to be successful when post-testing. In part 1 of the training, I addressed how differentiated, individualized, and personalized instruction were all taken into consideration during the development of these plans. Well, you know that we have been emphasizing for quite some time now that the plans will take the guesswork out of teaching. Why, you might ask? Well, these plans truly are individualized. And we know that they are individualized because they don't emphasize content that was pre-tested. They're different from the student's individual profile report in that that report only tells you how the student performed on his reading pretest. It doesn't tell you what reading content is going to be post-tested. The IISPs actually identify the content which students must master at each level to support success when post-testing. Now let's talk about personalization. With these plans, students must own their learning. They have to, because they know exactly how their post-test is structured, as well as the content that is tested. They can actually track their progress with guidance from their teachers. In this personalized type of instruction, the students become the experts who monitor progress on their own, and they reflect on their learning based on mastery of tested content. Okay, so let's explore each reading plan component in detail. First, let's carefully look at each section of the plan so that we understand it. At the top, where you have section number 1 with the arrow pointing right, you have the name and level of the IISP. This one is the IISP for reading for the level M TABE 11-12 test. But what does this mean really? Well, the significance is that this plan corresponds to the student's post-test. Remember this, not the pre-test. So for example, because this is a level M plan, this means that this particular student will be post-testing on an level M reading test. Now, understanding this is critical. Again, remember, we are preparing students for a post-test. Let's look at an example. Let's say you have a student who pre-tested on the reading level E test. And you know that the student will be post-testing on the level M test. So the student's IISP should be the one for the level M test. Now let's look at section 2, which is located under the title of the IISP. And this is the section for you to input just basic student, teacher, and course information. Okay. Under that, you have section 3, current testing information on the left, and section number 4, post-testing information on the right. Now, section number 3, current testing information, refers to the student's pre-test information. Here, you will write the date that the student took the pre-test, the level, the test form, and finally, the corresponding NRS level score with the correlated scale score range. So you input all the information in this section based on the student's individualized profile report. But don't worry too much about that yet. In the next section, I'll show you how to select the correct post-test form and level, along with how to transfer the student's pre-test information to his IISP. For now, let's just look at the structure and content of the reading IISP so you understand it. Under section number 4, post-testing information, you have the TABE level at which the student will be post-testing. You can also see the correlated college and career readiness level, see in this example, along with the average word count and Lexile level for the level M reading test. Now, this information is very important when selecting instructional resources and activities, because when you do that, you want to be sure to provide students with content that mirrors what they will encounter on their post-test. Section number 5 identifies the domain, followed by a % in parentheses. Now, the % indicates how much of the test addresses this particular domain. In this example, 37% of the test is dedicated to questions regarding key ideas and details. Right under the domain, you have the CCRS category or categories. This particular domain encompasses 2 CCRS categories: reading informational text, and RI is in parentheses, and reading literature, RL. You'll soon understand the significance of these categories when we look at the aligned CCR standards in the next couple of slides. You'll see that. And right under the category, you have the number of questions pertaining to this particular domain. Now let's move to section number 6, which is directly to the right of section number 5. And here in section number 6, you can mark how well the student performed on his pre-test on this particular section of the test. Section 7 is the table header that identifies the TABE category, TABE subcategory, and TABE skill, all of which are found on the student's individual profile report. Now, the columns titled Emphasis and Aligned CCRS contain information from the TABE 11-12 blueprints. And of course, you already know the emphasis can be labeled high, medium, or low. And then the aligned CCRS will give you a specific reference number to the correlated CCR standard so that you can obtain more detailed description of the standard or the substandard if you need one. And then finally, the last title in the header reads mastery date. Here, either a teacher or a student can write the mastery date for each specific standard and substandard. Now, this for me has to be probably the most important column on this report. Why? Because if it's updated in a timely manner, it will provide an easy at-a-glance view of content that has already been mastered. So this column actually helps keep individual student data live, current. And just a little note, it's important to remember that sections 5 through 7 are going to repeat in format for every domain that is tested and listed on each individualized plan. Now, just a brief note before we move to step 2, let me explain the plus sign and the NAs. As we've indicated in prior webinar trainings on the TABE 11-12 test, we have identified some discrepancies between the blueprints, the CCR standards, and the students' individual profile reports. Now, if you see a plus sign in front of a TABE skill, what does it mean? This means that the topic appears on the TABE blueprint for that particular subject area and test level, but it never appears on any of the students' individual profile reports for the same subject area and test level. It may also indicate that the skill appears on the new TABE 11-12 skills crosswalk for reading, and those I think, I'm not sure June, but I think those were provided several months ago. But it's excluded from the individual profile reports. So either way, just to eliminate the mere possibility of excluding content that is possibly tested, we decided to add that particular skill to the document. But we wanted you to know why it had a plus or an NA on it. And again, NA, similar situation. If you see NA on the IISP, it means that this particular skill is found on the individual profile report, but it's not listed on the TABE 11-12 blueprint. Okay, we just wanted to make sure not to miss anything. Now let's move to section 8. And this is the last section of the plan and can be found after the last domain chart. This section has a complete list of every aligned CCR standard on the plan, on each individual plan, and it's grouped by domain. Now, because the information is organized numerically, any teacher can easily locate detailed explanation for any CCR standard or anchor or substandard under each particular domain. So let's just say, for example, if you're looking at conclusions in the TABE subcategory on this slide, you can see that the aligned CCRS is 5.RI.1. So if you want to know what 5.RI.1 stands for, you would look under section 8 of the plan, and you would scroll down until you located the number. Then to the right of the number, you would have a detailed description. Now, you can't see the explanation here because the document is cut off, but we've added a box to include the full description, which in this case is, quote, accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. So it gives you a little bit more to build on when you're trying to select activities for instruction. There's also a checkbox in front of the standard number, and you can check these off as well when the student masters them. Now, just to note that in the months to come, we will be aligning the tested TABE categories and subcategories and skills to the new Florida best standards. And once these are completed, you will be provided with an addendum of these best alignments. All right, we're doing great today. Let's move to step 2, to success. Okay, so in order to target student deficiencies, in preparation for post-testing with a TABE 11-12, when they're talking about reading, math, or language, it's essential that the correct IISP be selected so that you can ensure that the tested content is addressed throughout instruction and is assessed for mastery. So the question is simply, which ISP should I assign to a student? Now, selecting the right one does not have to be complicated. We're going to keep it very simple. The first thing you need to do is select the next test assignment, or NTA. This consists of 2 items. One is the form number, 11 or 12. The other is the next test level, E, M, D, or A. So let's start with the form number. Now, when you're determining the next form number, it's best to keep it simple. If the student pre-tested on Form 11 of the TABE 11-12 test, then post-test with Form 12, and vice versa. By selecting the alternate form, you're going to be able to post-test more frequently, thereby allowing you increased opportunities to move the student from one functional level to the next. And always be sure to follow the test publisher's recommended hours of instruction, please. Now that you selected the alternate form, you next need to select the level at which your students will post-test. Now, determining the next level is extremely critical. Always try to post-test a student at the lowest level possible. This has 2 benefits. First of all, it ensures that you're addressing mastery of lower level content so that you avoid learning gaps. And 2, it's easier for a student to make a functional level gain or gain an LCP, or literacy completion point, in this manner. So let's follow this chart. Based on a student's pre-test TABE level, which is the left column, as well as the NRS level, which is the middle column, you're going to prepare the student to post-test at the identified next test level, which is the right column. So you don't need to look at the scale score range to determine the next test level. You just need to look at the student's NRS level. And in case you're wondering, this information is available directly from the student's individual profile report. Let's look at this example here. To select the next test assignment, or NTA, the student first tested on Form 12, so we're going to assign her Form 11 for the post-test, right? The student pre-tested on the level M test for reading, see number 1 on the chart, and scored an NRS level 2, see number 2 on the chart. So what are you going to assign the student for post-testing? Look at number 3, level M test for reading. So this student's NTA for reading is 11M. Before moving to step 3, let me clarify a point. If a student has a plus or minus, right? Remember, you may have the option to retest the student at either a higher or a lower level test. Now, before making the decision, please consider making the decision that will allow the student to post-test at the lowest level possible. And again, remember, it has 2 benefits. It's going to avoid you missing or creating learning gaps or increasing learning gaps, and it's going to be easier for the student to gain a literacy completion point, or LCP. If you need additional information on this, by the way, there's a document on tabetest.com website, so you have the full description of this testing information piece. Now that the student's next form number and NTA have been identified, you can get the corresponding IISP, right? So this is going to enable you, the teacher, and the student to focus on instruction that addresses non-mastered content that is going to be post-tested. The IISP level should match the suggested NTA level. So let's go to step 3 and let's create the IISP. Now, based on the student's pre-test score, we already determined that the student is going to post-test on a reading Form 11 level M test. So you need a blank copy of the ABE Reading TABE Level M IISP. And you, of course, also need a copy of the student's individual profile report, which contains his pre-testing information. All right, so we type in the student's personal information at the top, and we transfer the current testing information from the individual profile report. We select M12 and NRS level 2. Now we transfer the performance on the individual domains from the individual profile report to the corresponding section of the IISP. And I want to clarify very briefly that sometimes there is an insufficient number of questions under a specific domain. If this happens, you are not going to have the performance for that domain showing in the performance category section. Okay, so that just won't be there. Let me bring something to your attention as well. Remember that this student pre-tested on the level M test, right? So the student will be post-testing on the level M test. This is going to make it very simple to transfer information from the individual profile report to the IISP. Now, if the student were to be testing on a level or post-testing on a level D test, a higher level test, you would not be able to directly transfer the data from the IISP because the tested content would be different. So when you're moving from one ISP level to another, in essence, you're going to need to cover most, if not all, of the content on the IISP. Okay, so at the beginning of the training, I asked you to keep foremost in your mind that one of the key goals for using the IISP is for the student to become a self-directed expert learner, right? Who monitors progress and reflects on learning based on mastery of content and skills. It's strongly recommended that you complete this next activity with the student, with your students, please, and that you encourage the student to monitor his own progress. Now, you may need to do this with a student several times until he truly understands the process and is comfortable doing it on his own. But nonetheless, you still need to monitor the student's progress in order to determine when he's ready to post-test. So best include him in that decision. Let's continue transferring the student's pretest data to the IISP. So now we're going to look at each domain section. Please, I want you to take one section at a time, right? And reference back to the student's individual profile report. On this TABE report, you need to transfer the information from the demonstrated skills column, check that out, it's marked in red, to the IISP. Now, because these skills have already been mastered, right, you want to simply put a check mark in the mastery date column on the IISP. You don't need to put the testing date, just put a check mark on it. Continue to cross-reference until you have completed this for all the domains. Now, to make the process even simpler, just check off the skills under demonstrated skills column, and then you know that anything that's left over under that domain has not yet been mastered. So you just leave the rest blank. Okay, now you are ready for step 4 of the process, using the IISP to differentiate, individualize, and personalize. Let's move along. All right, so now that the student's IISP is complete, you have a document that takes all of the guesswork out of instruction. With the IISP, both you and the student know exactly what standards, substandards, and skills need to be emphasized and which need perhaps a light review or can be skipped altogether. In step 4, I'll address how you can use the IISP to differentiate, individualize, and personalize instruction. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this part of the process requires practice and experience. The more you use the IISP to develop lessons and activities and to drive instruction, the more proficient you will become at it. Also remember that every time that a standard or substandard or skill has been mastered, it's essential that the mastery date be documented on the student's IISP. This is going to keep your data live, and it's going to let you know, you and your student know, right, when your student is ready for post-testing. As the student monitors his own progress, I promise you he's going to become more self-directed in his learning, and he's going to learn to seek out activities that address non-mastered content and skills, because that's what he's going to focus on. To address differentiated instruction, be sure that you group students into small groups based on commonly failed content. Now, these groups have to be flexible, folks, all right? You can't have students in the same groups the whole length of the course. It doesn't work, right? If a student has already mastered content that you're teaching in one group, be sure to provide alternate activities that address non-mastered content. So this is why your groups have to be fluid. To individualize your instruction, you're going to work one-on-one with a student. You're going to target one failed standard or substandard or TABE skill at a time. Assign activities only for non-mastered content. Pace activities to fit your student's learning style. And test the student as soon as he has demonstrated mastery of the tested content. Don't do this whole end of the trimester bulk testing anymore. That is not effective. Finally, to personalize instruction, select or customize activities that are of interest to the student. Now, the goal here is for the student to eventually be able to select his own activities based on non-mastered content, right? You are still going to need to provide guidance at first to ensure that the student makes appropriate selections based on needs, skills, and interests. Then, little by little, gradually release the student as he demonstrates accuracy in making the appropriate selections on his own. Now, as educators, we know that learning must be reinforced. We can't just watch a webinar training and, poof, all of a sudden, we've automatically processed and internalized all of the information that is presented. I know that many of you will have questions even after this full 1 hour training. You will still have questions about the test, questions about the IISPs, and maybe even questions regarding how to align resources to the IISPs. Now at IPDE, you know that we are always trying to anticipate your needs, same way as you try to anticipate your students' learning needs. And that being said, we've created a new TABE Assistance Center. This Assistance Center can be accessed directly from our IPDE website. If you were with me in June in the mini webinar sneak peek for the reading IISPs, you already know how excited we are about this addition to our IPDE website. Now, let me just take a very brief minute to highlight the 3 main sections of the IPDE TABE Assistance Center. One, if you look at number 1, you see an FAQ section. Here, we will post the most common questions and answers about TABE 11-12. Look at number 2. This is where you can access and download the IISPs. You're now able to download the language and reading IISPs, okay? The math ones will be available toward the end of summer of this year, 2020. These downloadable templates, by the way, and one for each of the TABE reading level tests, EMD and A, are all fillable PDFs, all of them. So remember that this means you have the option to print them, or you can save and update them digitally. It's your choice. I personally recommend you keep an updated digital copy because you can easily attach it to an email and send it to the student. Number 3 highlights the third component for the TABE Assistance Center, which is the Ask a TABE Advisor. Oh, I love this part. I'm telling you, I think this is one of the best parts because it allows you to ask a TABE-related question, right, and receive an authentic response from one of our TABE advisors within 72 hours. And it's not going to be, oh, I think this is the answer. No, these are, TABE knowledgeable people. Questions can be general questions about the test. Questions could be about obtaining TABE certification for our state, meaning Florida, or even questions specific to the new TABE IISPs. Now we are at the last part of our training, but before I continue or close up, let's summarize some key points. Okay, you now have the tool that you need to take the guesswork out of teaching and to engage each student in taking an active part in his learning. Now remember, please, together you and your student can both use the IISP to target specific learning needs. Use them to hold individual data chats with your students. Go over what they've mastered, what's pending. Have discussions about, the type of activities that they prefer and which are of greater interest to them. As you personalize activities more and more, you will see how students become engaged and empowered in their learning. And finally, you're going to see your data start to move in the right direction. Finally, I want to emphasize that all the student pretest data that you will learn to transfer to the IISPs comes from the TABE 11-12 individual profile report. So there is no guessing involved. All I need to do is remind you not to miss out on our next IISP training at the end of the summer, which is going to be the third training of the trio of TABE 11-12 IISP. So that, of course, is going to be the much anticipated Math 1. All right, please remember that once you've completed each training and you begin to implement these IISPs in your ABE classes, you will immediately begin to see your students progress more quickly through the course. They'll be more excited. They're going to make more functional level gains, which is going to move your data in the positive direction. All right, and remember to use the fillable PDF format, save them, attach them so that your students always have an updated version of their plan. All right. Finally, I did want to tell you, I do want to clarify, even though we are emphasizing tested content here on these IISPs focus on tested contents because they're individualized, but this is not what you should be using for general instruction in your classroom. You must always follow the Florida curriculum frameworks and ensure that you are covering all of the required standards for the program. Now, as always, if you know me, you know that I like to end my trainings by emphasizing a growth mindset. So I'm going to ask you to take what you have learned in this training one step further today. First, change how you look at instruction. Please look beyond your class as a whole. When differentiating instruction, be sure that you group students based on non-mastered content. Then take it further and begin to look at each individual student so you can address the specific needs of each student. Redesign your curriculum if necessary. Develop lessons and select instructional resources based on commonly failed content. Emphasize activities that support tested reading content. Make an active decision to drive targeted instruction based on the IISP and use the plan to motivate your students to become actively engaged in their own learning. Pace your activities and schedule post-testing based on each student's individual progress. Review all of the information covered in the webinar and look through the companion resource handbook. Share this information with teachers, with administrators and district personnel, and become an expert yourself. Reflect and make a change. Finally, ask yourself, what is working especially well in my ABE reading class and what isn't? Hold regular data chats with your students. Be sure to update your IISPs every single time that content is mastered. Work with your testing department so you can test your students as soon as they've demonstrated mastery of content. Share your students' success with other teachers so that they too are motivated to implement changes that's going to drive up everyone's student performance data. In June, this concludes our individualized instructional student plans, IISPs, for the TABE 11-12 reading test. I think at this time, I believe we have a few minutes to answer some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. I've been answering them live as you've been talking, but a couple of things is, how about strategies for special students?
As in SPED students?
Special, like special ed or
yes,
things like that.
Well, this is going to tell you what is tested, so it'll allow you to see where some weaknesses are, and then you can, obviously we can't modify the curriculum, but we can provide support. Personally, my recommendation is that you group students that have common deficiencies or maybe learning needs so that they can work together and work at their own pace. That's very important. That's one of the key ingredients to this piece. You don't want to put someone that needs more additional attention, maybe some specific skills in reading skills that they're lacking. So to be able to address this, if you could do these in very small groups, that would be very effective. If you only have 1 or 2 students with an issue, then you may want to do it more individualized.
Okay, thank you. And if a student tests on a higher level TABE test, would you use the IISP of the higher level test?
Yes, absolutely. Once you have determined the tests that they're going to be post-testing at the level, the IISP is going to match that level. So let's say the student tested on an M, will be post-testing on a D. You're going to select the IISP for the level D. And then you will probably be covering all of the content on the level D plan because it will be different from the M. So you want to make sure that you don't miss any of that content.
And I know you address a lot of English language learners. So would you use this plan with English language learners at all?
Well, in ABE, we have all kinds of learners. You know, we have students that are on 504 plans or AIEPs. We have, you know, ELL learners. It doesn't really make a difference, the type of learner, because the plan targets what is tested. So whether, you know, the student is a former ESOL student, or not is irrelevant. They're still going to have to show mastery of a certain specific skill, right? So that
Right.
being said, you would still be using the same exact plan regardless of the type of learner.
And then Maria, last question. I know we're getting a lot of people who are not doing remote testing right now for TABE, but they are letting us know that they're using the IISPs to direct that targeted instruction. So I know you do that at your school too. So any words of wisdom on that?
Yes, so throughout the state, we have, I've spoken to several colleagues, and there are different models in place. Some districts have decided to allow either teachers or administrators or even registrars determine where to place a student, a new student coming in that has no testing scores. And other districts like mine have decided to place the student at the lowest possible level. Now, without a test, we really don't know what level the students are at. So it could be performing at a high level and we place them on a low level or vice versa. The point is that regardless of the level the student is placed at, you can always use the plans as a checklist to see what content they've mastered and what content they have not mastered. Not according to a standardized test or anything of that nature, but according to any test that you want to give them. For example, let's say they're using, you know, TABE Academy. If they're using TABE Academy, they may have, you know, there's a test there that they can take that more or less places them on a certain level that it correlates to the TABE test and at least gives them an idea for placement. And then if they would score on a level M, you might want to use a level M plan. If you want to start them at the bottom, use those plans as checklists to see how far they've mastered each level content. And then once they've mastered one, you can use that to move them to the next level so that they stay motivated and they see the progress from mastery of content from one level to the next level.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maria. Really appreciate you facilitating this webinar today. Okay, let's pull up the feedback slide. And if you wouldn't mind, just take a few minutes to answer these 3 short questions. You know, your feedback is extremely important to us, so we'd love to hear from you. So if you could just take a few minutes to answer these questions, and then we will close out the webinar. And we hope that all of you are doing fine and your families are safe. And, you know, we are always here to assist. So call us, email us, whenever you'd like.
And use our TABE Assistance Center.
And use our TABE Assist and use the IISPs, right?
Yeah, it's going to work.
A lot of work goes into that.
Yeah, and the data looks good. The data looks very good.
And we really need to concentrate on moving that data in the positive track.
Yes, I think our secret is out. So now everyone's going to be in competition with each other.
Who's
That's
going to have
great
the
though.
best performance?
I don't know, it's going to be pretty tight.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much for joining us today. And Maria, thank you so much for being such a great facilitator.
My pleasure. I look forward to seeing all of you soon at the end of summer. Please stay safe, you and your families, and enjoy.
That concludes our webinar. Thank you.